I learned to accept that I'd always be second choice. I met my fiancé, now husband, 3 years ago at an art gallery where I was showcasing my work. He's everything I could have hoped for, kind, supportive, and he actually likes spending time with my grandfather. When we got engaged 6 months ago, my grandfather was the first person we told. We planned a small wedding at the local church where my mom used to volunteer. Nothing extravagant, just 75 guests and a reception in the church hall. When I told my dad about the engagement, he seemed genuinely happy and excited. He even teared up when I asked him to walk me down the aisle. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe things could be different. 2 weeks before the wedding, Tessa called me. Her tone was condescending as usual, but what she said still shocked me. Emma was coming home for a surprise visit and had planned a father-daughter camping trip for the same weekend as my wedding. Tessa told me I needed to reschedule because this trip was their highest priority since Emma rarely visits. She said it like it was the most reasonable request in the world, like I was being difficult by having my wedding on a date that suddenly didn't work for Emma. I called my dad immediately, hoping he'd tell me Tessa was joking. Instead, he said he was sorry but Emma had already booked everything and paid for a special cabin in the mountains. He said he couldn't disappoint her since she'd planned this whole trip just to spend time with him. He suggested I could have the wedding the following month instead, saying it wouldn't be a big deal since it was just a small ceremony anyway. I sat in my car for an hour after that call, just staring at nothing. Then I drove to my grandfather's house. As soon as he opened the door, I broke down completely. Between sobs, I told him everything. He held me like he used to when I was little and had nightmares after Mom died. When I finished telling him what happened, he was furious in that quiet way that's scarier than yelling. He asked me if I would want him to walk me down the aisle instead. The relief I felt at his offer made me realize I'd always wanted this, to have the person who actually showed up for me be the one to give me away. I didn't tell my dad about the change of plans. The wedding went ahead exactly as scheduled. My grandfather looked so proud walking me down the aisle, and for once I didn't feel like second best. During the ceremony, I asked my cousin to take a picture of me and my grandfather walking down the aisle and send it to my dad. I wanted him to see what he'd missed. 3 hours into the reception, my dad burst through the doors looking completely shocked. His face was red and he was still wearing camping clothes. He started yelling about how I couldn't do this to him, that I was his daughter and this was his right. My grandfather stepped between us before he could reach me. What happened next will stay with me forever. My grandfather, who never raises his voice, looked my dad straight in the eye and said that a real father would never abandon his daughter's wedding for a camping trip. Then he turned to all our guests and announced that he was giving me his house as a wedding gift because I deserved to have at least one parent who truly cared about me. The silence that followed was deafening. My dad started crying and apologizing, saying he'd made a terrible mistake. Then Tessa and Emma arrived, with Tessa screaming about how I'd manipulated everyone and ruined their special family weekend. Emma just stood there with that superior smirk she always has. My grandfather calmly asked security to escort them out. Now my phone won't stop buzzing with messages. My dad keeps calling and texting, begging for forgiveness. Tessa has sent long paragraphs about how ungrateful and selfish I am. Emma posted a rant on Facebook about how I've always been jealous of her success and how I manipulated my grandfather to hurt them all. My dad's family is split. His sisters think I should have told him about the change of plans, but his brother says he deserved worse after years of neglect. My grandfather's lawyer is already preparing the paperwork for the house transfer. I don't regret what I did. My grandfather has been more of a father to me than my dad ever was, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Maybe now my dad will understand how it feels to be someone's second choice. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since my wedding, and I can't believe how much has happened. I thought the drama would die down after a few days, but it's only gotten worse. Let me explain everything that's happened since my last post. My grandfather officially transferred the house deed to my name last week. It's a beautiful 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood, the same house where my mom grew up. I was overwhelmed by his generosity, but I had no idea this would trigger such chaos. Yesterday morning, I was at work preparing for a client meeting when Tessa stormed into my office. She hadn't even bothered to check in with reception, she just barged in while I was on a call. My coworkers later told me they could hear her screaming from the break room. Tessa was completely unhinged. Her face was red, and she kept waving some papers around that turned out to be printed copies of the house deed. She started yelling about how I'd manipulated my grandfather and destroyed their family's future plans. I tried to get her to lower her voice, but she wasn't having it. That's when she revealed something that made my blood run cold. Apparently, my dad and Tessa had promised Emma years ago that she would inherit my grandfather's house. They told Emma she could sell it and use the money to start her dream business in Australia. They'd been planning this for years, without ever consulting my grandfather or considering that the house wasn't even theirs to promise. Tessa demanded I sign the house back to my grandfather immediately. She said Emma had already talked to real estate agents about potential selling prices and had made plans based on the expected money. When I refused, she started bringing up old grievances, how I'd never appreciated their attempts to include me in the family, how I'd have always been difficult and jealous of Emma's success, how I should be grateful they even invited me to family events. I had security remove her from the building, but not before she dropped another bombshell. My dad had apparently made a deal with Emma years ago that she would inherit everything from both sides of the family, including my mom's side. Because I wasn't really part of their family anymore, Tessa sneered that I didn't deserve any inheritance since I'd never been the daughter my dad wanted. After Tessa left, I called my dad to confront him about what she'd said. He broke down almost immediately and confessed something that shattered my heart. My mom's jewelry collection, the pieces she specifically wrote in her letters that she wanted me to have, hadn't been lost during the divorce like he claimed. He'd given them to Emma on her 25th birthday as family heirlooms.